Welcome back to Reddit Chronicles. As requested in the last video, today's subreddit is r/nuclear revenge. If you're new here, do consider subscribing to help me feed my cat. Here are today's stories. Okay, background. Along with having two little brothers that I am very protective of, I also have an older half-sister who I am extremely protective of. Let's call her OS, or older sister. She is 4 years older than me, and this story takes place when I was 18. Like in my other posts at the time, I was a heavy drug addict. Okay, so she was a manager of a small family-owned restaurant. A restaurant that she paid me cash for, being a sub-dishwasher. There was a cook, and Cook is what we call him, who was a stoner and dope fiend. I kinda liked the guy at first. I became one of his drug connections. This is very relevant. I was a very cautious drug connection. I made it a point to really get to know anyone that might be buying drugs from me. This helps me keep out of handcuffs. So I hung out at his place, met his wife, he took me to a few of his friends' house parties, and etc. Why did he become the object of my revenge? Well, I haven't been to the restaurant for about 6 months, and at the time, my family had cut me off any and all funds. To be honest, it was the right thing to do, but I still talked to my older sister 2 or 3 times a month. So at this point, older sister had fired Cook because she caught him smoking weed in the kitchen and blowing the smoke into the hood over the range and drinking on the job. Now you'd think if you got fired because of those reasons, you would be expecting it. It wouldn't throw you through a loop or anything, right? Well, apparently, not for Cook. The day she fired him, he screamed in her face, threatened her. That night, her car magically got broken into and the tires were slashed and some threatening things were carved into the doors. Did my older sister call the cops? Yes. Did Cook get arrested? No. Why? When it was clearly him, he had a friend vouch for his whereabouts. So my older sister tells me the whole story crying and was worried for her safety when she had to close the restaurant late at 2 a.m. Time for my nuclear revenge. I wanted Cook to wish he had never been born, so my plan was to wreck his whole life. First, his ride. I paid the Cook's car a visit, slashed his tires in a way that would break both his axles, and topped his gas tank off with diesel. Cook had got a new job working at a pizza place, a place that I knew most of the employees, seeing it's on the same street as my older sister's restaurant is. So I called some of them and told them what he had done to my older sister. I didn't want him to get fired because I liked knowing where he was. They just made his life hell at that place until he was bullied out of there. This took a while. Third, his drugs. He was a big dope fiend, and I was an even bigger dope fiend, and I knew all his connections and stopped all sales to him very easily by saying that he was in fact a snitch. If you know anything about dope fiends and dope dealers, they are hyper paranoid, and that's all it took. Side note for any who don't know, dope fiends and dope dealers are drug addicts and drug dealers. Fourth, his home life. That was easy. All it took was a pretty girl at a house party and a camera. His wife kicked his dumb butt out. LOL. Last but not least, letting him know that it was all me and to get the F gone out of my area. And some assault. Can't help it. I let Cook know that I had some amazing dope for cheap. Meet me at location at time. He got jumped and robbed and told to get out of town before it gets even worse. I never saw him again. Edit. So this was a response to a request for more details of the, assault. Okay, bud. At the meetup, he was greeted by a few people who I was sure that he didn't know. He got surrounded and ended up with a broken nose, black eyes, a shattered eardrum, a specialty of mine, in the right ear, and a few other issues that would be a little bit too much to divulge, and then I showed up and gave him the marching orders. Greetings. Normally this was not even a subreddit I followed, but a certain YouTuber entertained me a lot by reading a few select posts from this one. Our story is from years ago. I used to work for some kind of full-stack agency as a coder, doing websites, desktop applications, and integrations for customers. Life was good, and it got even better. After managing to provide an important customer with 5-star hotels all around my country with a great website, with integration to their ERP, and also mobile solutions which didn't exist then in my country, a headhunter had found me. He offered nearly triple the salary I was getting, and it was impossible to say no to that. I informed my employer, gave him a generous notice of a month so I could wrap up the last projects. Let me warn you that I was a very young and incredibly trusting person then. When my employer told me there were some problems, that I'd have to receive my last salary with the next one, I accepted. Last day of the job, when he asked me to sign the paper that declares I had nothing indebted to me by that company, I signed it. I was a moron. I was young. They never paid, of course. Even though being stiffed that way was a lump in my throat, I tried to gulp it down. I worked hard at my new job, trying to prove that I could do better than I did before. But another sneak attack from my ex-employer was the last drop. One day I arrived at the job, my new employer called me to his room. He explained to me that my ex-employer reached out to him and told him that I was lazy, a liar, worthless, and it wasn't worth the effort to have me as an employee because they were about to sue me, so I wouldn't be able to do any work with all that legal stuff. I was beet red. I apologized for being a nuisance, and I said I'd clear my desk instantly. He laughed cheerfully and said, "You've been working for me for 2 weeks. You completed 2 high-quality websites and half of a desktop app. I'll cut my own throat before I fire you." Still, I was so shaken that he had to give permission to me to leave early. It was Friday anyway. I went home and cried, not because of sorrow, but rage. I couldn't touch them. I just couldn't. I couldn't? That's the day I fired up Google and typed, "how to hack," for the first time in my life. The first response was a forum in my native language. I started reading and gosh, I had a lot to read. Coding and hacking are, even though they share the same expertise, vary so much when it comes to details. I confess, it was then impossible for me to think like them, but thankfully the forum crawled with helpful technical tutorials, telling me hows and whys of every exploit I could use. As I said, I was young and a moron. Back then I had my own mini admin network that I used in every website I made, and I just realized there was a crucial mistake I made in calls to create new records, users, pages, news items, galleries, everything. I wasn't checking the authorization at all. It would be nearing impossible for a hacker to use this because he wouldn't know or get exposed to the exact call, but I knew it. It was about 6 a.m. when I finished reading. I used public transportation to go to the other end of the city. I found an internet cafe where the young attendant didn't care about IDs and which didn't have any security cameras. I sat in a corner and started breaking every single website I made for them. There was one about pastry materials, a website consisting of over 1,000 ingredients. In the main page, a random assortment from each ingredient type would be shown as a gallery. I replaced about 20 of them with images of, human waste. Only 20, so a viewer who got used to it wouldn't realize the error until some time had passed. I made the chief physician of a hospital page the angel of death itself, with images and a special bio. People don't look into physician bio pages, so I was sure it wouldn't be found out for long. I made an announcement in Ultra-Nationalist Party A's website that their #1 enemy would be giving a speech. In a local newspaper page, I made all old videos instead link to the famous Lola Chuma video, where an anime spins a leek in her hand. Slowly, a few websites a day, I broke every single website I made for them, approximately 60 websites or so. The backlash from customers seems to have been furious, in a domino effect. He lost his customers' trust and his references, which simply means everything for this kind of job. Once the proud owner of one of the best agents in the region now tries to work in a tiny office making a living doing third-rate websites with his meager skill. Even though I never met him during this period, one of my friends was working under him until the last moment. I loved listening to his struggle to find out how I did it. They knew I did it, they just had no way of proving it, while losing more and more customers every day from my friend. I don't know if this suits the phrase nuclear, but at least the cold satisfaction I get whenever I walk past his tiny office these days may be considered nuclear. Wow, not only is this guy smart and dedicated, but everything seems to have lined up for him. Reminder to large corporations, don't screw over the people who made your products for you. This is my first post here, so please bear with me. Just a little background to start off. I was an exterminator for better than a decade, and was only a few credits shy of a degree in entomology. Needless to say, I know my stuff when it comes to anything one might consider creepy and or crawly. With all this being said, I was a specialist for the absolute worst kind of infestations. I treated for bed bugs, small cousins, to ticks that only drink human blood. I bet you know where this is going, and just to cut you off, no, I never intentionally infested anyone. In fact, the revenge in this story isn't even for me. It was for what turned out to be one of the sweetest women I've ever met. For the purpose of the story, we're going to call her Mary. Mary was a nurse in World War II. I was called out to Mary's home by the management of the subsidized apartments as she had complained about a small bug issue. What I found when I got there was not a small bug issue, and still haunts me a little to this day. When Mary answered the door, she was covered in bedbugs. Her hair, her clothes, and even crawling on her hands. Without going into too much grisly detail about insect biology, this isn't normal. Bedbugs don't like touching human skin, and they don't hunt when people are up and moving. That is why the bed is the most prevalent place to find them, and thus the name. I immediately called an ambulance, waited on them to arrive, and warned them about the very real possibility that anywhere they took her would be in severe danger of being infested if they didn't do something to decontaminate her. The poor woman was suffering from amnesia, and it was luck of biology that she hadn't gone into toxic shock from the number of bites she had received. When she was rushed off and having to be hosed off, literally sprayed with a hose, and having her clothes taken from her in semi-private, revenge mode started. Bedbug treatments are expensive, very expensive, and I had a lot of contacts with the local Department of Social Services and the Adult Protective Services because of the amount of charity work I had done. Every single one of them got a phone call. Subsidized apartments have rules, including that they have to make routine checks. For an infestation to get to that level, it had to gone unchecked for years. She had been being eaten alive for years. I called the local news, warned every neighbor, and collected statements about exactly how often the maintenance staff and management had entered the apartments. Once the DSS and APS was done, I urged every single person who was put in jeopardy of infestation to file civil suits and recommended a lawyer I had done some work for in the past. He was more than happy to take the cases as a class action suit. By the end, I had the manager of the apartments arrested for elderly abuse and neglect, and the entire staff from the top down fired. They had been falsifying paperwork saying that they had been inside the apartments, performing routine maintenance, and generally scamming the government for services they didn't actually provide. I visited Mary for a while after that, checking in since it didn't seem anyone else had in a long time. She was a wonderful person, and she never deserved to have to live like that. Her health recovered for a while, but time eventually came for her. I'll never forget her, or forgive the people that allowed it to happen in the first place. Holy, imagine having to live for years being covered head to toe in bedbugs. Nope. Part of me hopes they burned down that entire apartment complex. And lastly, thanks to my subscriber, Alex Hawkins, the Minecraft gym lad, for suggesting this subreddit. If you guys like this video, do remember to like it, and if you want more content just like this, help me out by subscribing. See you in the next video for another episode of Reddit Chronicles.